Perched on the edge of the cliff, I surveyed my city below like a comic book vigilant. I had come here seeking solitude, but it eluded me. I craved silence. I yearned for the world to stand still, just for a moment, so I could gather my thoughts. Even from this height, the city buzzed with life. I could sense its vibrancy, its relentless noise. Beneath me, the sounds of the city's vitality echoed through the open air, relentless and inescapable. Only death, it seemed, could bring me the silence I desired. Sirens blared, a loud lament for an unfortunate victim. Planes rumbled as they cleaved through the sky. Even the unseen animals around me added to the commotion. Owls hooted, coyotes howled, and house dogs barked, filling the night with their calls. In the distance, the city lights twinkled, each one hinting at untold stories. Some would be erotic in nature, others violent and chaotic. There were even stories that combined both elements. At this very moment, thousands upon thousands of narratives were unfolding, each one a testament to the city's ceaseless life. For example, earlier this evening, a woman was meticulously selecting an outfit for an upcoming date. She had an expansive wardrobe to choose from in her extravagantly large closet. Ultimately, she settled on a brand new cocktail dress that she had recently purchased on a whim, with no specific event in mind. This kind of spontaneous shopping was typical for her. The price tags were irrelevant. It's doubtful she even glanced at them. Regardless of her spending spree on her credit card, it was never declined. It was almost like she had an endless supply of funds, a magic well that never ran dry. This fortunate woman was preparing to look her absolute best for her date, hoping to be admired for her beauty. Who doesn't want that? She selected her favorite lingerie, designed to enhance her cleavage and attract attention. Her $150 bottle of perfume was ready, waiting to be applied in just the right spots for a subtle yet intoxicating effect. She indulged in a long, luxurious bath with scented bath salts. Afterwards, she carefully styled her hair and applied makeup with the precision of an artist. She dressed in front of a full-length mirror, ensuring every detail was perfect. Her phone rang, briefly interrupting her ritual. With a knowing smile, she glanced at the screen and answered with a throaty, seductive greeting. The conversation was brief, laden with suggestive undertones. Once she finished her preparations, she did a final twirl in the mirror, satisfied with the confident reflection staring back at her. With an extra spring in her step, she left the room and ventured into the night. Why detail her preparation so exhaustively? Because the precision with which she prepared for this night out seemed peculiar, considering her husband was out of town. Could a woman go to such lengths for a casual meet-up with friends? It's possible, sure, but in this case, unlikely. I knew this woman well, and more importantly, I knew who she was going to meet. I understood why she waited until her husband was away to make these plans. Her flirtatious phone conversation confirmed my worst suspicions. It revealed darker, more hateful corners of my psyche that I wasn't aware existed. It made me sick just to think about it. She revolted me. I had loved her with everything I had and owed her everything. But at that moment, she embodied all I despised in women. I realize I shouldn't think this way. Men are taught to respect women, to love, protect, and cherish them. Even to understand them, although that might be too ambitious for most of us. Nevertheless, we try. From a young age, we are encouraged to put women on a pedestal. Boys are often told that girls embody qualities like sugar and spice and everything nice. Our first encounter with a woman is our mother, who brings us into the world. Later in life, many of us seek a woman as a life partner, who may also bear our children. These nurturing actions are often said to deserve our utmost reverence, but if we delve deeper, this narrative is incomplete. Do women create life entirely on their own? Of course not. So, what do we truly owe women? Respect, undoubtedly. The same respect we should extend to every human being. Yet, why does it often seem that society prescribes a greater degree of respect for women than men? This isn't always explicitly stated, but cultural patterns suggest it. For instance, in family-centric sitcoms and comedies, the portrayal often trends towards savvy, attractive women who must navigate the antics of their bumbling husbands. Take Everybody Loves Raymond as an example, a show I genuinely enjoy, by the way. This replaces the older archetype like father knows best. What are the implications of this? It suggests we treat women's words and actions as beyond criticism. Their opinions are often regarded as gospel, even when they're incorrect. A woman's admission of being wrong typically comes after all other possibilities are exhausted. In the meantime, men are often advised to remain silent if they wish to maintain harmony. Why has questioning women or holding them accountable for their actions become synonymous with misogyny? They question and hold men accountable all the time. Why is a double standard considered unfair unless it favors the weaker gender? When men cheat, they're labeled the worst type of person. When women cheat, it's often assumed the husband must have failed her. When a man hits a woman, he's seen as an abusive criminal who deserves jail. And to be clear, I am absolutely not defending abuse. However, if a woman hits a man, people often wonder what he did to provoke it. Why am I voicing these thoughts? Do I despise women? Is this the bitter rant of a man who's been wronged and now views the opposite gender with contempt? Am I a misogynist? Notice how asking fair questions often leads to being labeled negatively. Before you stop reading and peg me as a woman-hating, anti-feminist jerk, I need to explain why I'm here, grappling with these questions. This afternoon completely shattered my worldview. Everything I was taught as a young man was appended in mere minutes. All the advice my parents gave me about marriage turned out to be a lie. My mom misled me about what to expect if I treated women well. My dad deceived me about what it means to be a real man. Their teachings shaped my expectations for married life, and they are the reason I find myself standing on this cliff, both literally and figuratively. I feel it's important to go back to the beginning. Perhaps by revisiting the past, we can understand how I ended up here, poised on the edge of this precipice. 4 years ago. That's a fine woman you have there, son. Take care of her. Respect her. Be the man I taught you to be, my dad said, beaming with pride. He pulled me in for a firm embrace, giving my back a hearty pat. I will, Dad. I promise, I replied. We stepped back from the brief hug. Dressed in matching tuxedos, we stood in one of the back rooms of the church, waiting for the time to arrive so we could head down the aisle. From the sanctuary, the excited murmurs of the gathered guests drifted in. Where's Mom? I asked. Dad chuckled. You know your mother. She's giving orders to the bridesmaids and driving everyone mad. Even the priest got a taste of it. I frowned with concern. Dad, please make sure she doesn't overwhelm Arya, especially today. This is about us, not about Mom's quest for perfection. Son, relax. Your mom's just excited. She's doing her best to make sure everything goes perfectly. She's been dreaming of this day since she first held you. Dad. Son, look at me, he interrupted, his voice firm, placing both hands on my shoulders. He took a deep breath, signaling for me to do the same. I matched his deep inhale. You're nervous. I get it. I felt the same way, as does every man in your shoes. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. I nodded, taking another deep breath, and felt a bit of the tension ease away. Calm down, he continued. There's nothing that will stop Arya from marrying you. Nothing at all. She loves you fiercely. Even your mother can't upset her enough to change her mind. You're right, I replied, trying to steady my nerves. My stomach churned. This was it, the moment of truth. I was about to pledge my life to Arya and vow to always be faithful to her. I loved Arya with all my heart and didn't want any other woman. But the thought of being her husband for the rest of my life was overwhelming. After all, I was only 23. If I lived to be 85, we'd spend 62 years together. What if my love for her wasn't strong enough? What if I wasn't a good enough husband? What if she realized marrying me was a huge mistake? What if someone better came along? What if... My dad seemed to read my mind. He interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Think about me and your mother, son. Look at us. I've been married to her for 17 years, and I don't regret a single day. You and she are the most precious things in my life, and I'd be lost without you. I love her just as much as the day I saw her in her wedding dress. She's my everything. Things haven't always been easy. There's a 9-year age gap between us, which can be tough. We've had our struggles and fights, but we always make it through. She knows I'm not going anywhere, and I know she won't either. We both understand that we're lifelong partners. Nothing will tear us apart, and we won't let it. Trust me, son, you want that. One day, when your son is walking down the aisle, you'll tell him the same thing proudly." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Pride held them in check. Instead, I quickly sniffed and deflected the moment with a joke. "What if I have a girl?" I asked. It took him a moment to catch on, but he played along. He smiled and replied, "Then you keep trying until you get a boy. I want a grandson." "Yes, sir. If I have to sleep with Arya every day, I'll do it for you." His face twisted in a bit of discomfort at that, prompting me to ask, "Too much?" "Yeah, a little," he admitted with a short nod. We burst out laughing, shaking our heads in mock disgust. I couldn't have been happier to have him back with me. He was the perfect choice for my best man. Even my best friend Jacob didn't come close. No one could match up to my dad. Technically, Justin was my stepdad. My biological father left when I was 2, and the details of his departure were always murky. My mother avoided the topic as much as possible. The only clear memory I had was Justin marrying my mother when I was 6 after a year of dating. To me, Justin was the only father figure I ever knew, showing me what a real man should be. The wedding went flawlessly. Arya was undeniably the most beautiful woman in the room. Seeing her alleviated all my doubts. I knew I had made the right choice. I vowed to her with every ounce of sincerity I possessed and listened as she recited hers, tears of joy streaming down her face. Finally, as I kissed my bride, I made a solemn promise to never let her go, and I never did. Throughout our 4-year marriage, my parents were our constant support. They guided us through our first big argument. My mom passed down Thanksgiving cooking tips to Arya, and my dad always had advice ready for me. Our marriage was everything it was supposed to be, and a lot of that was thanks to them. I aspired to be the husband to Arya that my dad was to my mom. His mantra, "A happy wife makes for a happy life," guided his every move. He imparted to me the importance of taking care of your woman. Now, I know all of that was just a facade. The present. Until today, I believed my dad was the wisest man on earth. I strived to model my marriage after his and mom's. Until today, I had it all. A beautiful life, a wonderful wife. My parents were both alive and vibrant. I worked hand in hand with my dad, who operated a chain of computer shops. Our stores specialized in computer repairs, but our real moneymaker was selling custom-built computers and parts online. Most of our customers were hardcore gamers or individuals needing high-quality machines. Our website was designed to guide users, whether they were computer experts or novices building their first PC. Business was thriving. Had I been blind? Did I miss all the warning signs? Was life so blissful that trouble seemed impossible? Standing on the edge of the cliff, I saw only a veil of darkness below. In the distance, faint city lights twinkled and danced, but beneath my feet lay an abyss, void of answers, void of relief from the earth-shattering truth I now faced. What was I to do? How could I continue my relationship knowing it was all built on a lie? Earlier this afternoon. I relish Sundays. My entire week revolves around that sacred day. While most people eagerly anticipate Saturdays, I suspect that many of them aren't married. Saturdays in my household are reserved for my wife, Arya. On these days, I commit myself to her honey-do lists, plan our date nights, accompany her on shopping trips for my man's opinion, and my credit card, or generally fulfill her requests. However, Sundays are my sanctum, and I'm not talking about church. On Sundays, I have the liberty to indulge in my interests, a silent understanding Arya respects, even if on a subconscious level. She typically finds her own activities, allowing me the freedom to enjoy my day. During the colder months, football occupies my Sundays. In the summer, you'll find me taking leisurely rides on my Ducati. Other times, I might work on my truck, hit the gym, hang out with my best friend Jacob, or simply lounge around in my boxers doing absolutely nothing. Sounds idyllic, doesn't it? This Sunday, however, was supposed to be an exception. My father and I had to travel out of town for a crucial meeting with representatives from a company that recently acquired one of our key suppliers. The new owners had raised prices on several components we regularly purchase, threatening our profit margins. My father arranged a meet and greet at a neutral venue, bringing me and a few other key figures along to negotiate better terms based on our long-standing relationship with the former company. This trip would also serve as an opportunity for me to get to know the other team members better and introduce myself to the new owners. Most of them were my father's age and saw me primarily as his son, with little else to connect us. Since joining my father's business, he had been grooming me for a more significant role, and this meeting was crucial in repositioning myself as a key player. Unfortunately, the meeting fell on the worst weekend of all, Super Bowl LI weekend. The Patriots had secured their spot in the game once again, and I was eager to watch Tom Brady clinch his 5th championship. Despite my expectations of an easy game where the Patriots would rout the Falcons, I still wanted to witness it. The plan was to fly to our meeting location on Friday, hold discussions on Saturday, and return home Sunday morning. Jacob, my best friend, always hosted the best Super Bowl parties, actually, the best parties in general. He was the fun friend. I was the responsible one, a dynamic unchanged since high school. We had a long-standing tradition of watching big games together. NBA Finals, Super Bowls, Final Four, you name it. Both of us are die-hard Patriots fans. Since Jacob began his Super Bowl parties, the Patriots had been in 6 of them, and notably, they lost twice when I missed the party. My friends blamed me for those losses. If you're not a sports fan, you might not get it, but if you are, you'll understand my dilemma. I had to be there. You know what they say about the best laid plans. As luck would have it, every flight back home was booked solid before kickoff. Rescheduling the meeting seemed like the obvious choice to me, but the reps from the new company had other ideas. No amount of pleading could sway them. Their schedules were jam-packed, and this was the only slot they had free. Coincidentally, they were from Dallas. I'm sure their lack of interest in the Super Bowl had nothing to do with the Cowgirls choking again. My dad tried to lift my spirits by organizing a Super Bowl party in our rented suite. It was a kind gesture, and I did my best to show appreciation, but the disappointment was hard to shake. Still, I was a team player. I put on a brave face and brought my A game. We arrived on Friday and spent our time strategizing for the meeting, ensuring we were on point and razor sharp. The next day, the meeting commenced. Funny enough, we had psyched ourselves so thoroughly that we started viewing the reps as adversaries. We were ready to go in swinging and trust no one. Reality proved anticlimactic. The reps were just like us, no flashy suits or condescending attitudes. They were warm, courteous, and even cracked a few jokes. However, when it came down to negotiations, the atmosphere grew tense. We articulated our needs, they explained their limitations. My dad subtly highlighted our stellar reputation and the substantial business we'd done with their predecessors, hinting that losing us wouldn't be in their best interest. This prompted a call to their home office, and eventually, we reached a favorable resolution. The politicians in Washington could learn a lot from small business folks who, despite disagreements, listen and work things out. But hey, we aren't politicians, are we? If it were easy, anyone could do it, but I digress. We felt pretty good about how things had gone. I should have been elated, but my lingering disappointment over missing the main Super Bowl party was hard to shake. Jacob's parties were legendary. He could make even a bar mitzvah a blast. A room full of old guys in a suite didn't quite measure up. Plus, if the Pats lost, I'd never hear the end of it. Not that there was any real risk of them losing. The game would likely be decided by halftime, but you can never be too cautious. Finally, my dad suggested I catch a flight to a neighboring city, rent a car, and drive the rest of the way home. I might miss kickoff, but I'd at least catch the second half with my friends. You see, that's why I love him. After parting with an absurd amount of money, I managed to change my flight and reserve a compact car for the drive. My dad and his friends preferred to remain in the suite to watch the game. They are seasoned husbands, men who have been married for over a decade. They relished the rare opportunities to enjoy some freedom away from their spouses. So off I went home early. This seems to be the standard response to a life-altering revelation, doesn't it? Damn cliches. I loathe them. Ultimately, it's the small decisions that shape our lives. Whether it's fate or sheer coincidence, minor deviations from our planned paths often lead to significant outcomes. I practically broke the sound barrier with the Nissan Versa rental, zipping down the highway. I had no idea those cars could go so fast. As I tuned into the game on the radio, my mood soured. The score was 14-0, and the Falcons had just intercepted the ball. I had to get there. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jacob and the guys were cursing my name. Close to halftime, I finally reached home, only to find Aria absent. Hopes of surprising her faded as I remembered she and my mom had plans for the weekend. I called her cell. She picked up on the second ring, greeting me like she always did. The conversation was normal, and I decided not to reveal that I was back. Playing it cool would mean I wasn't expected home before curfew. If I hurried, I could join Jacob and the guys before the second half started and stay out as late as I wanted, or even crash at Jacob's place if needed. With the game going the way it was, a heavy night of drinking seemed likely. By the time Aria discovered the change of plans, if she ever did, I could feign forgetfulness and apologize for forgetting to tell her. Save your judgments, folks. Plenty of men have done this and worse. I was poised to end the call, formulating an exit strategy to head over to Jacob's. I asked, "You're with Mom, right?" It was more of a conversational save than a genuine question. I had assumed she was with her mom. Yeah, I'm with Mom," she replied, her voice tinged with an odd hesitation. For some inexplicable reason, my curiosity was immediately piqued. The hesitation in her voice felt off, and there was a certain tone that hinted at deceit. Focusing more closely, I asked, "Are you guys at our house or my parents'?" I scanned the empty room around me, hoping she would take the bait. "We're at their house." "Why?" she replied, a bit defensively. I almost sighed in relief that she hadn't said our house, but her combative tone raised my alarm. Initially, I was just curious, but now I was concerned. It was one of those indescribable feelings you get when you know someone well enough to sense something is wrong. "No particular reason. Just missing you, that's all," I said, trying to ease the tension. I wanted to avoid a confrontation, knowing how these conversations usually went, ending in frustration without resolution. Trying to keep things light, I asked, "Got any plans for the day?" "Oh yeah, you know us party animals," she responded sarcastically. Then she added, "Hey hun, I've got to go." Was she rushing me off the phone? "Okay, sweetie. Remember to use protection if you pick up any strange guys. I love you, talk to you soon," I joked. We often bantered like this, so I didn't think much of it, until there was a noticeable pause before her reply. "Love you too, Dan. Bye." Even as I ended the call, I was already grabbing my keys and heading out the door. Why was she acting so strange? I had to find out. My parents' house wasn't far from Jacob's, so it wouldn't be much of a detour. While I valued my freedom, something pressing urged me to investigate. It was a risk I felt compelled to take. Upon arriving at my folks' place, I quietly let myself in with my key. Expecting to find Mom and Aria in the living room, I was surprised to find it empty. Silently, I moved upstairs, hoping they might be in the bedroom watching TV or something. They weren't there either, but I discovered something unexpected. The master bedroom was spacious, and as I gently pushed the door open a crack, Mom didn't notice. She stood in front of the mirror, holding up a cocktail dress, an attractive one at that. I stole a glance around the room for my wife, but she was nowhere in sight. Part of me wanted to announce my presence, but something felt off. Trusting my instincts, I remained silent and waited, watching her closely. She was humming as she gazed into the mirror. In the background, the sound of running bath water filled the room. Her vanity was cluttered with various makeup items, ready to be applied. For a woman whose husband was out of town, this seemed off. My world shattered when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, smiled, and answered it. "What is it, Robert?" she said, her tone teasing and playful. A wave of nausea hit me like a swift punch to the gut. Robert was my biological father's name, a name my mother had always refused to discuss. I had assumed he was out of the picture for good. Was this that Robert? If so, why was she talking to him with such familiarity? And if it was a different Robert, the same unsettling questions remained. It got worse. "You've been impatient for the 30 years I've known you, and you're not getting any better," she said, her tone confirming my worst fears. "I'm getting ready now." She paused to listen, then giggled. "God, you're so bad. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm not some street hooker, you know." More listening followed by another giggle. "Yes, well, I'm not that easy, at least, not always. I'll admit your charms do have a certain effect on me, but I'm a married woman. I can't go prancing around town with no panties on. You already have a hard enough time keeping your hands to yourself." She listened for a moment more, and her expression darkened. "Stop that. Stop that right now. I'm married to him, okay? You had your chance with me, and you blew it. He walked out on me. I loved you with everything I had, and you just left. I still love you, I'll admit that, but I'm a lot smarter now than I was back then. I may not love just in the same way, but that doesn't mean I'm going to leave him for you. Love isn't everything. I learned that the hard way. You taught me that. So don't think that just because I give in to you occasionally that you're getting a second chance. We have an intimate relationship. That's it. If you can't deal with that, then feel free to go away. This time, you can stay gone." At that moment, my heart broke. My mother, the woman I once believed all women should emulate, was a liar and a cheater. She was the very kind of woman she had always warned me to avoid. How could she betray Dad like this? How could she betray me? After all the years she spent lecturing me about respecting women and holding up Dad as an example of a real man. Is this really how women treat real men? I should have confronted her. I should have stormed into the room, screaming and demanding answers. But I couldn't. Despite what she had done, she was still my mom. So I left. I simply slinked away, got into my car, and drove aimlessly until I found myself at this cliff. What was I to do? I yearned for the safety of solid ground, both literally and metaphorically. I longed for my naive existence, but it was forever shattered. They say there are moments that force you to grow up. A parent's death, the major illness of a loved one, or the breakup of a close relationship. In that sense, I had been lucky, at least so far. But this was just as devastating. This was my moment, my crisis. I felt a decade older than I had been just a few hours ago, when I rented a car to come home. I couldn't bring myself to do what I knew I had to do. I had to take the leap. Not into physical death, but into the death of my childhood ideals. The death of the belief that my parents were perfect. I didn't know what awaited me on the other side, how I would land, or what damage it would cause. All I knew for certain was that something had to die. I had to take the leap and face the ugly truth. I had to tell Dad. He needed to know, even though it would break his heart and probably make Mom furious with me. Ironically, she always taught me the value of honesty. I wasn't going to start lying now just because she had. I would tell the truth. With that decision made, I got back into my car and drove home. It was late, and I had completely forgotten that I was supposed to be out of town. I had missed Super Bowl LI, which I would later regret. Those who watched it know what I mean. When I walked through the door, Aria was home. She did a double take before hurrying over to greet me. "Honey, I thought you were coming back tomorrow," she said as she hugged me. "Yeah, well, things didn't go as expected," I mumbled cryptically, taking off my coat and trudging over to the couch. Suddenly, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. "Did everything go okay?" she asked with concern, sitting down next to me. Unable to speak, I simply shook my head as tears began to fall. "Daniel, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Is your dad okay?" Her voice trembled as she asked, but I could only manage to shake my head in response. Then, with a shaky breath, she asked, "Is he home?" I was so exhausted that I nearly missed it, something so minor it could have been overlooked. But my senses were heightened, subconsciously scanning for all the clues I'd missed over the years. I looked deeply into Aria's eyes, sensing the hesitation in her voice when she asked about my dad. The look in her eyes confirmed my suspicions. She knew. Where were you today? I demanded, my entire demeanor shifting. The weariness in my voice transformed into a stern, inquisitive, and possibly accusatory tone. My eyes narrowed as I stared at her. The tears had stopped. While the sadness lingered, anger was rapidly taking its place. I recalled our earlier conversation. She claimed she was with my mother at her house. That was a lie. Huh. She responded, her expression one of bewilderment, but I saw fear lurking beneath the surface. Earlier tonight, when I called, I asked where you were. You said you were with Mom, remember? Yeah, Mom. I was with her, she replied quickly, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. How long were you with her? What did you two do? When did you leave? I demanded, no longer hiding the accusatory tone. She fumbled for words, looking increasingly nervous. Daniel, we were. Why are you acting like this? Just answer the questions, Aria. They should be simple, I insisted. Daniel, just answer the goddamn questions. I yelled furiously, leaping off the couch as if it had burned me. My fists clenched tightly, knuckles reddening. Her face transformed into a mask of fear and terror. Eyes wide in a way that made her seem to be wearing bifocals. She sat there stunned for a moment before jumping up and dashing to our bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Collapsing back onto the couch, I felt my energy drain away. I just sat there, absorbing the crushing realization. Discovering the truth about my mother was devastating, but knowing Aria was part of it cut even deeper. About 15 minutes later, she appeared again in the doorway of the living room. I hadn't even heard her approach. You know, don't you? She asked, voicing the most ludicrous question I'd ever heard. So do you? I responded curtly. I wasn't looking at her, but from the corner of my eye, I saw her nod sadly. Her expression was forlorn, with tear streaks staining her makeup. So, were you ever going to tell me, or were you planning to keep lying to me? I asked with eerie calmness. Daniel, it's not that simple. Really? I turned to face her, staring directly into her eyes. It's not that simple. That's your excuse for lying to me. Honey, I just didn't want you to get hurt. She's your mother. You look up to her. I knew that it would devastate you. That justification infuriated me. Bullshit, Aria. Bullshit. You didn't lie just to protect me. You were covering for her. Tears started streaming down her face again as she silently cried. Normally, her tears would have moved me, but right now, I just didn't care. It's not like that. I mean, I did lie to you, but she struggled to explain. When nothing came to her, she sighed sadly and brushed her hair out of her face. I hated lying to you, Dan, she finally said, looking down. I huffed and shook my head. More bullshit, Aria. You had no problem lying to me. No problem whatsoever. You did it so convincingly. It makes me wonder what else you've been lying about. Her crying stopped at that. She wiped the wetness from her cheeks and sniffled, but her eyes narrowed as they focused on me. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, a tinge of anger creeping into her voice. I didn't answer immediately. I saw the impasse we were heading towards. I could have postponed this discussion until my emotions were more stable. Perhaps I should have, but you know what? She was the one who lied to me, who knows how many times. She was the one in the wrong here. I was tired of being a patsy for the women in my life. I was tired of always prioritizing their feelings over my own. That's Dad's way. Look where it got him. You never answered my question. Where were you today? What are you implying? She asked, taking a challenging step forward. Her eyes were locked onto mine. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you a question. One that you still haven't given me a straight answer to. I was with my mom, if you must know, she said with attitude. Mind if I call her to corroborate your story? She looked like I'd slapped her in the face. So now you don't trust me. Was she really offended because I didn't trust her after catching her in a blatant lie? Really? Why would I trust a liar? I asked icily. The fury building within her was so intense that it seemed as though steam might erupt from her ears with a high-pitched whistle. You know what? She screamed, her lips pressed together in a tight line. I braced for the conclusion of her outburst, but it never came. Whether she was too enraged to continue or simply hadn't planned beyond you-know-what, I couldn't tell. She only glowered at me. I wasn't finished. Speaking of lies, have you ever cheated on me? She laughed sarcastically, placing her hands on her hips and shaking her head before her expression morphed into a malevolent grin. No, Daniel, I've never cheated on you. I'm not a skank. Only your mother does that, she sneered. The surge of emotions that coursed through me was indescribable. Her words struck with sniper-like precision, leaving me too furious to summon a retort. My inability to refute her claim only fueled my anger. She crossed her arms and smirked, daring me to reply. She knew she had struck a nerve, and her brazen confidence infuriated me even more. Screw you, Aria. You're a goddamn liar. Worse, you lied to protect a woman who's cheating. If a liar defends another liar who's a cheater, it's logical to think the first liar is a cheater too. Her face flashed a blend of confusion and irritation as she screeched, "What?" in a tone suggesting my words were incomprehensible. Let me simplify it for you. Birds of a feather cheat together. You had no issue protecting a cheater, which makes me believe you found nothing wrong with it. Hell, you even facilitated it by providing an alibi. Only someone comfortable with cheating would do that. Aria was poised to respond, but thought better of it, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath instead. Daniel, today was a shock for you, I understand. Right now, you're saying things you don't mean. Let's go to bed and pause this conversation. I don't want us to say things we'll regret. Her voice was consolatory, attempting to calm me down. To me, it felt patronizing. No, Aria, no. You don't get to do that. I yelled, jabbing my finger in the air towards her. You lied to me. Do you get that? Is that sinking in? You lied to me. To your goddamn husband, you lied to protect her. You don't understand a damn thing because I never lied to you. So don't patronize me like I'm some out-of-control kid needing a timeout. That's not what I was doing, Daniel, she said, stepping forward and attempting to touch me. I recoiled as if her touch would burn, sliding past her. I heard her calling my name as I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. By the time I saw her silhouette in the doorway, I was already backing out of the driveway. With a squeal of the tires, she became a speck in the rearview mirror. Daniel, I heard some troubling news today, my mom said, standing in my bedroom doorway with her hands on her hips and a disappointed look on her face. I was sprawled on my bed, engrossed in Street Fighter 2 on my Super Nintendo. What did I do now? I responded, exasperation coloring my tone. Mentally, I ran through the checklist all high schoolers have when parents ambiguously hint at wrongdoing. Is it report card time? No, that's still a month away. Did I forget dish duty? No, not yet. We haven't even had dinner. Did I get detention again? No, I've been staying out of trouble since the stink bomb in the girls' bathroom incident. I heard something about you making Mia Wilson cry the other day. Care to explain? Relieved that it wasn't serious trouble, I casually shrugged. Oh, that. We were dating, but I broke up with her. She cried. That's all. And why did you break up with her? She asked. Struggling to find a tactful answer, I quickly censored the thought. Mia doesn't hang out, but Olivia promised to make me feel good with her mouth. I just didn't feel that way about her anymore, Mom. It was time to move on. I tried to be gentle, but she got emotional and cried. Is there another girl? The question felt awkward coming from my mom. I glanced down sheepishly before admitting, yeah, I kinda like Olivia now. Her expression shifted to one of disbelief, almost as if I had uttered something outrageous. Wait a minute. You don't mean short skirt, two-top Olivia, do you? Yeah. Daniel, why would you break up with a nice girl like Mia for that? Girl. Because she promised to make me feel good with her mouth. Because we have more in common, I hastily lied. She gave me a knowing look, then sat down on my bed. Daniel, she began, choosing her words carefully. You can't treat girls like disposable toys. They're not here for you to play with when it suits you and then discard when a shinier one comes along. They have feelings. Yeah, but Ma, let me stop you right there, she interjected. What if your dad had done the same to me? What if he discarded me because some woman in a short skirt and a halter top winked at him? What if he made me cry the way you did to Mia, and then brushed it off like it was nothing? How would that make you feel? Her words hit me hard, leaving me speechless. Just the thought of my mom running away in tears made my stomach churn. I wouldn't like it, I admitted, muttering softly. Exactly. Aren't you grateful that your dad isn't a man who treats women that way? Yeah, I replied, guilt creeping into my voice. A warm smile spread across her face as she lovingly ruffled my hair. Good. If you need someone to emulate when it comes to respecting women, look to Justin. Ask him questions. He embodies what a real man should be. When you treat a woman like a queen, she'll always treat you like a king. I jolted awake, my heart racing. That dream, no, that memory from high school lingered vividly. Why was I dreaming about my mom? My groggy mind struggled to make sense of the unfamiliar motel room around me. As the fog lifted, memories from the previous night poured in. I had left home and checked into this shabby place, unable to face Aria. Screened calls from her drove me to shut off my phone entirely. Instead of confronting my problems, I bought a 12-pack and some dubious hot dogs from the nearest gas station. I feasted on my makeshift meal while downing beer after beer, waking up to a scene of 10 empty cans scattered around me. Groaning, I sluggishly got out of bed and trudged to the bathroom. When I returned, I turned my phone back on to check the time. It was only a little after 9. What didn't surprise me were the nearly 20 missed calls and 12 text messages. A couple of texts were from my mother, indicating that Aria had spoken to her. No doubt Aria revealed that I knew about her infidelities. Now, my mother was likely panicking, terrified that I'd tell my dad. Good. One missed call stood out. It was from my dad. I wasn't sure what to make of that. Had he talked to Mom, or was he simply calling to inform me he arrived home safely? I longed to call him, to spill everything. He deserved to know the truth, something I was sure my mother hadn't disclosed. But I couldn't. It felt like a mercy killing, knowing you should end the suffering but hesitating to pull the trigger. Bottom line, I dreaded destroying his world. It had nearly broken me, and she was just my mother. How devastating would it be if she were his wife? Unable to summon the courage for a call, I opted for a compromise. I sent him a quick text. Make it home, Uck? I doubted he'd answer right away, so I jumped in the shower, washing away the odor of stale alcohol and regret. I felt marginally better until I realized I had no fresh clothes. Reluctantly, I donned the same grimy outfit from yesterday, a relic of a grueling 3-hour flight, a 4-hour drive, and a pity party of 120 ounces of beer. Afterwards, I checked my messages, hoping for a response, and found one. It read, "Where are you? Aria is a wreck. Says a two had a fight and you left." So, he did talk to them. Of course, those lying women probably left out why we argued. Now he thinks I'm the villain. Great. Typical. Did I ever truly know them? Was every woman a deceitful liar? It was time to face reality. I was done avoiding the inevitable. Like I said before, he deserved to know. I shot off one last message before gathering my things and leaving the room. It read, "Meet me at Tony's. Just you, don't tell Mom or Aria. Pulls. It's important." I didn't wait for his reply. I knew he would come. I headed to the front desk to settle my bill, hopped into my truck, and drove to meet him. He arrived 20 minutes later. His favorite pizza and drink were already on the table, having been brought just minutes before he walked in. "Hey son, pizza for breakfast? What are you, on a diet?" he joked, sliding into the booth. I wanted to respond lightheartedly, but all I could manage was a solemn look. He sensed the serious tone, and his playful smile faded into concern. "Simon, Dan, talk to me. What's going on?" I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat, wanting to stay unsaid, but I forced them out. "Mom's cheating on you," I finally blurted. The words hung in the air, heavy with gravity. It took a moment for him to process. Confusion turned to dawning realization on his face. "What?" he asked, disbelief lacing his voice. I didn't repeat myself. I knew he heard me, and more importantly, he believed me. His question was just a reflex to absorbing the painful truth. I felt awful. The pain on his face was heart-wrenching. I wished I could take back my words, that I could stand up and shout, "Just kidding." But there was no turning back now. I wished I didn't have to drag him into this painful mess. "When did you find out?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Yesterday." He shook his head sadly. "Do you know who it is?" All I could do was nod. I was about to tell him, but he preempted me with another question. "Is it Robert?" I gasped. "How did you know?" I asked, stunned. My dad seemed lost in thought, shaking his head vehemently. I believed it was over. Thought she would get him out of her system eventually. I waited. I was patient. I tried to be a good husband, gave her space. Then he slammed his fist on the table and yelled, "That bitch." "Dad!" I exclaimed, taken aback by his vehement response. His eyes met mine with a strange, distant look, as if he were lost somewhere far away. He seemed surprised to realize I was still there. Why am I still paying for my mistakes? Why? I did everything right. Why is this still happening to me? He cried, his body trembling with emotion. Even though he was looking at me, it felt like he was speaking to the empty space between us. His eyes were glazed, unfocused. A surge of anger welled up inside me, not directed at him, but at the entire situation. I was furious that he blamed himself for this, enraged at my mother for putting him through this, and frustrated that I had to be the one to break the news. I was just plain pissed off. "Dad, this is not your fault." I insisted, trying to break through his torment. He just shook his head in denial. "Yes, it is, son. It's all my fault. This is karma. I tried to make things right. I tried, but it always comes back around." "What are you talking about? You're not making any sense, Dad. What did you do?" Justin, 23 years ago. The heart monitor beeped incessantly. Each sound should have been a blessing, a sign that my daughter was still with us. No matter how grim things seemed, it meant she was there. Somewhere inside. But she wasn't really there anymore. Her body carried on with its routine functions, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Cassie's essence, her spirit, was gone. What remained was just an empty vessel, a shell of moving parts. "Please, come back to me. Please," I thought desperately as I squeezed her hand. I would have given everything I had to feel a response, even just the faintest movement. I would have traded all my possessions for just 5 minutes to see her open her eyes and look at me one more time. But it was all pointless now. The agonizing decision had been made. Today was the day I had to. I couldn't even bring myself to say it. Listening to the detached doctors discuss my daughter's condition and the improbability of her ever waking up felt so clinical. So cold. It was like they were mechanics, telling me that fixing my broken car wasn't worth the cost. This is my daughter, gotta admit, my little girl. She's a human being, not just a warm container for donor organs. I wanted to rage at the doctors. I wanted to rage at the nurses. I wanted to rage at God. He was the one who made it rain that night. It was his fault that the drunk driver took that road at that exact moment. He let that bastard run the red light and smash into my wife and child. He took them away from me. But why was she driving that night? What led her to that road? Where was she heading? Stop it. She was going to her mother's house. She should have been at home with you, but she wasn't. She was leaving you. Shut up. She was leaving because she caught you. She found the credit card statement you hadn't shredded. She saw the payments for the motel. You remember the motel, don't you? The one where you met that woman every Wednesday. You practically paid her rent. Your wife knew you'd be there, paid the clerk for a spare key, and burst into the room. What did she see? What did she see? Shut up. Everything was my fault. Completely. I thought I deserved a bit of fun, given that I was bringing in a lot of money and my business was flourishing. I was the provider, the man of the house. Everything was aligning perfectly, except for my frigid wife. Though a wonderful spouse and mother, who had faith in my business ventures when everyone else called me crazy. She didn't enjoy intimacy as much as I did. Back in the 90s, real estate was booming, and she stuck with me even when we lived in a shabby apartment, having faith that I would succeed. I loved her deeply, but no longer felt desire for her. Intimacy with her felt like another item on her to-do list, alongside cooking, laundry, and taking Cassie to school. What I longed for was a goddess in bed. I found that in an escort through an ad in the local paper. This was before the internet made such things easier. She didn't advertise as a prostitute, but the coded language in woman seeking a man for a mutually beneficial relationship was clear to those who understood it. The first time I called Lily, I was nervous, unsure of what to expect. But the experience was incredible. She was everything I wanted in a bed partner, uninhibited and passionate. Initially, the affair weighed on my conscience, but it became easier over time. My weekly encounters with Lily became something I'd craved, and missing a week affected my mood significantly. I convinced myself it was for the best. My wife didn't enjoy intimacy, and with Lily, I wasn't bothering her. I got my needs met, and my wife got a break. It seemed like a win-win. I still saw myself as a good husband. I never raised my voice or laid a hand on my wife. I adored her and our daughter, spoiling them with whatever they desired. This one indiscretion seemed minor in comparison to all the good I did. But she didn't see it that way. All she felt was betrayal and pain. That's why she was on that road. That's why she died on the operating table. And now, I was sending my final goodbyes to my daughter, who lay before me, about to be taken off life support. Daniel, the present. Dad's entire body trembled as tears streamed down his face. I could only sit back, stunned. The man who raised me was unrecognizable in this story. They say it's a hard day when a child realizes their parents aren't perfect. It felt sobering, to say the least. The last 24 hours had been a harsh awakening. I wanted to sympathize with my dad, but my thoughts selfishly circled around how everyone I loved had let me down this weekend. One by one, they failed me, chipping away my beliefs about marriage until there was nothing left to hold on to. Dad, I don't know what to say. My words seemed to upset him even more, and his sobbing intensified. I had never seen my dad cry before, not ever. It was a jarring realization. Is that why you put up with Mom cheating on you? Because you felt you deserved it? I asked. It's karma, son. You and your mother are my second chance. I owe it to my daughter to be the best dad I can be, and I owe it to Cynthia, my first wife, to be a great husband to your mom. Dad, I paused, trying to find the right words, but I realized I no longer cared about being diplomatic. That's bullshit. He looked up at me, shocked. I never swore at my parents, but I pressed on. You think you deserve to be cheated on because you were a lousy husband to another woman over 20 years ago. That's bullshit. Plain and simple. Daniel, I'm still your father. No, Dad. It's your turn to listen to me, I interrupted fiercely. His mouth snapped shut. All my life, you and Mom fed me lessons about treating women right. Well, you treated Mom right. No matter how you treated your first wife, you did right by Mom. She had no right to cheat on you. None. The fact that you're sitting here accepting this as karmic justice is an insult to everything you taught me about being a man. That made him pause and reflect. The silence enveloped us for a moment, then I saw it in his eyes, genuine respect. Not the kind born out of familial love, but the respect one man has for another. He nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. He even let out a brief, melancholy laugh. Not every day a son teaches his father a lesson. You mean besides on the basketball court? I teased, smirking to lighten the mood. I've schooled you plenty of times, old man. It took a few seconds, but then he laughed genuinely. Old man. You call me old man, yet you must have Alzheimer's if your memory is that bad, he quipped, patting my shoulder. The conversation shifted to playful banter, each of us arguing over who truly dominated on the court. For the next half hour, we sat there, eating our food and enjoying each other's company despite the somber undertone. I knew my dad was putting on a brave face for me just as I was for him. We were both hurting inside, but for a brief moment, laughter eased the pain. As we walked out to our cars, he stopped me. "Hey Daniel, I just wanted to thank you. You're a man I'm proud to call my son." I nodded humbly. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." We stood in awkward silence for a minute before I broke it. "So, what are you going to do about Mom?" He shook his head and sighed. "I really don't know. As long as I don't lose you, I can handle whatever comes." "You'll never lose me, Dad. Don't worry about that. You have to do what's best for you." He extended his hand for a firm handshake, then pulled me into a final hug. "I love you, son. No matter what happens, never forget that." "Same here, Dad. Same here." 6 months later, I knocked on the door of what used to be my parents' house, now just my mom's. There was a time I would have breezed in with my key, but those days were behind us. Since telling my dad about her affair with Robert, my mom and I had been drifting apart. She felt betrayed that I hadn't talked to her first before, as she put it, flying off the handle. The chasm between us widened when Dad filed for divorce. She shut me out completely after that, sinking into a depression and blaming me for her situation. I tried to reach out to mend what was broken between us, but she rebuffed every effort. It seemed the only thing she wanted from me was an apology. An apology? She wanted me to apologize. The logic seemed twisted. She was the one who cheated and ripped our family apart, yet she expected me to say sorry. No matter how much I valued our relationship, I couldn't bring myself to apologize. If anything, she owed everyone an apology. And so, we remained in that deadlock. After a month of being continually shut out, I finally stopped trying. When I gave up, a part of me withered. She was my mom, after all. No matter what happened, I still loved her. I was hurting too. Couldn't she see that? My relationship with Aria also spiraled downward. We lived under the same roof, but I had become a hollow shell to her. I admit I was subconsciously punishing her for her role in my parents' breakup, and also grappling with a deep-seated mistrust. My attitude towards women dwindled sharply. Between my mother's betrayal, her rejection of me, and the disintegration of my marriage, I lost respect for the opposite gender. They became, in my eyes, deceitful, manipulative adversaries. I viewed society's double standards as acts of aggression that fueled my anger. I even started a personal boycott. I stopped opening doors for women, stopped offering my seat, stopped complimenting them. Chivalry was dead to me. I saw it as a tool to turn men into obedient lapdogs, and I vowed not to be duped by the allure of the all-powerful feminine wiles. Aria bore the brunt of my resentment. She tried to apologize for lying to me and make amends, but I wasn't having any of it. I was trapped in my universe of anger and bitterness. Eventually, like me, she gave up trying. She no longer greeted me when I came home, and we stopped watching TV together. Our once vibrant marriage was on life support. There was no laughter, no meaningful conversations beyond the bills, no life at all. The only positive outcome was that my dad managed to keep his business, which had been one of his primary concerns. His business had been thriving before he married my mom, and thanks to his skilled lawyer, he retained it completely. He did have to pay alimony, and she got to keep the house, but compared to losing half of his business, it was a manageable compromise. Today, my dad asked me to visit my mom. He said she would need my support since the final papers came in today, and he wanted to ensure she was all right. Moments like these made me wish I wasn't an only child. Why couldn't I have a younger sibling to handle this instead of me? It wasn't that I didn't want to see her. I was just exhausted from her constant rejection. She actually expected me to be complicit in her lies and cheating, against my own dad, no less. I believed I did the right thing. They taught me to stand up for what was right, even when no one else supported me. Then again, they taught me a lot of things they didn't really practice themselves. Why should this be any different? Still, I promised to check on her, which led me to her house after months of avoiding it. After knocking 3 times with no response, I considered leaving. But a promise was a promise, so I used my key and opened the door, slightly surprised that the locks hadn't been changed. I expected everything to look different. This place had once been a family home, my family's home. Now it was something else entirely. It looked the same as I remembered, yet everything felt different. The only noticeable change was the absence of all the family photos. That single missing element transformed the place into nothing more than a beautiful tomb. I found my mom in the living room, watching TV, with an unopened manila envelope on the coffee table before her. I didn't enter and sit on the couch. I just stood in the doorway and called out to her. "Mom, it's me, Daniel." She stayed glued to the couch, her eyes fixed on the TV, acting as if I were an invisible specter. "Mom, I know you hear me." Eventually, she turned to face me, and her eyes, still brimming with anger, were mostly filled with sadness. She sighed and turned back to the television. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, her voice void of emotion. I came to check on you, to make sure you were okay," I said, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "I'm fine," she replied monotonously, but her tone betrayed the words. It screamed, "Get lost." For a moment, I considered leaving, but I couldn't. Months of pent-up frustration bubbled to the surface. "You know what, Mom? You're a real bitch." That got her attention. Her face contorted with rage, her nostrils flaring like an angry bull's. "How dare you talk to me that way?" I didn't falter. "Oh, now you want to talk to me. Is that what it takes to get your attention?" She jumped off the couch and marched over, jabbing her finger into my chest. "I'm your mother. I brought you into this world, and you will not come into my house and speak to me like that. Do you hear me?" I held my ground. This was the first real conversation we'd had in months, and I wasn't about to back down now. "If you're my mother, then act like it. I'm your son, and you treat me worse than a stranger." Her anger flared again. "You're my son, but that didn't stop you from betraying me." "Betrayed you? What about what you did to me?" "What I did to you?" "Grow up, Daniel. That was between your father and me. It had nothing to do with you. You destroyed our family, Mom. You ruined the foundation of my marriage. That has everything to do with me." "Stop exaggerating, Daniel." "No, Mom. Don't you see what you did to me? Everything you taught me was a lie. Everything. You told me if I treated a woman like a queen, she'd treat me like a king. Remember?" For the first time, she was silent. Seizing this rare moment, I decided to say everything I'd been wanting to say since this all began. "Growing up, you always told me to look to Dad as an example of how to treat women. I built my entire understanding of a man's role in relationships based on that. According to your words, you should have been treating Dad like a king. But then you went and slept with a man who treated you like garbage. What does that say about marriage, huh?" To her credit, tears began to fall. She didn't come back with some rationalizing excuses to flip the situation and make herself the victim. She didn't try to make me the scapegoat for what happened. She just stood there, silently crying. Then, suddenly, she pushed past me and ran upstairs. I stood there for a few minutes, straining to hear any sound that would tell me what she was doing. But the house was big, so I got nothing. After a couple of minutes of silence, I decided to go find her. I found her in her bedroom, lying face down on the bed, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Mom." "Go away, Daniel," she said. "Mom, please, talk to me," I pleaded. She continued to cry. I stood there, helpless and torn. I wanted to comfort her, but another part of me wanted her to face the consequences of her actions. When it became clear she wasn't going to let me in, I shook my head and turned to leave. That's when I heard her speak. "Don't go," she begged in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Please, don't go." I walked over to the bed and sat next to her prone body. As she sobbed, I gently stroked her back in an attempt to soothe her. She cried into her pillow for at least an hour. I stayed with her, touching her gently to let her know I was there. Even when hunger gnawed at my stomach, I stayed. When she finally sat up, we really talked. "Why, Mom? Why?" I asked a question that had been haunting me daily. She shook her head sadly. "Because I never stopped loving Robert. He had a hold on me that I couldn't shake, even after everything he did to me." "Didn't you love Dad, though?" She looked at me for a moment, then sadly shook her head again. "Yes and no. I did love your father, believe it or not, but I was never in love with him. I didn't love him the way I loved Robert. I know you want to hear something different, but I owe you the truth now. I do believe I could have fallen completely in love with him if I had met him first, but I didn't. Then why did you marry him? She let out a heavy sigh and wiped away a fresh tear. Because of you. Me? Justin adored you, Daniel. From the moment he met you, he loved you. You two connected instantly. He treated me kindly, too. We had been dating for months when I realized I couldn't love him the way he deserved. I almost ended things with him several times, but every time I was about to break it off, I saw you two together and couldn't go through with it. So, you married him. She nodded, sadness etched into her face. When he proposed, I couldn't say no. I clung to the hope that one day I would fall in love with him as I once did with Robert. How long were you cheating on him, Mom? She sighed and looked down. For a few years, at least physically. It wasn't continuous, more on and off. When you were home, I was a good wife, faithful, caring, attending to his needs, trying not to nag. But after you started college, I bumped into Robert at the grocery store. It felt like a cruel joke. He was with another woman, shopping for taco shells or something mundane, his arm around her shoulders as he whispered in her ear. When she laughed, I felt a pang of jealousy. She let out a bitter laugh. Can you believe it? Jealous over a man I hadn't seen in over 15 years. She paused and stared at the wall. I kept quiet, letting her sort through her memories. When he saw me, we exchanged a few words. Nothing significant, especially since he was with someone else. But the spark between us was undeniable. It sent butterflies racing in my stomach. I realized I still loved him, that selfish man. Tears flowed freely down her face. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. He started calling me after that. I don't know how he got my number, but he did. He invited me to lunch to apologize for how things had ended. I went, and though I didn't sleep with him that day, it wasn't long before I crossed that line. Did you feel guilty? Yes, constantly. The first time, I couldn't even look at Justin. I was so ashamed I could barely be around him. After a few days, I tried to make it up by showing him extra love and told Robert he had to leave me alone, that I was married and he needed to accept that. How did things start up again? I asked. She offered a wistful smile. Robert was persistent. He didn't take no for an answer. He chased me for months, and eventually I caved. That cycle just kept repeating. We'd ignite things passionately, then I'd feel guilty and push him away. But he would always come after me until I gave in. It became our pattern. Was it worth it? I pressed. Her expression turned somber. It was the biggest regret of my life, she said, her voice flat. At that moment, my emotions were tangled. Sure, there was anger and disappointment, but oddly, I also felt pity for her. She had a lonely path ahead. Karma might catch up to her just like it had to Justin. She deserved it, no doubt about that, but it didn't make my sympathy disappear. After everything, she was still my mother. No decent son could watch his mom suffer and feel nothing, whether she brought it on herself or not. Did he ever ask about me? I questioned, feeling a pang of guilt. It seemed selfish to even care, but this was one question that had haunted me. I couldn't quite understand why it mattered to me. My dad, Justin, had been, and still was, a wonderful father. I didn't need another parental figure. Yet the sense of abandonment lingered. Knowing that the man who contributed to my existence left so easily and never showed any interest in my life, left a void that no amount of resentment could fill. Discovering that he had maintained some form of relationship with my mother for the past few years felt like a betrayal. He wanted her, but not me. That stung. I didn't want any part of him, but admitting that it would have meant something if he had acknowledged me, even once, was unavoidable. She looked at me with sympathy this time. Only a little, Dan, she said, sensing it was not the answer I hoped for. When we first reconnected, he asked about you. I showed him some pictures of you at your wedding. I told him about your wife and how well you were doing, but he didn't really want to see you. It was just small talk. A knot of nausea churned in my stomach. I loved my mother, yet part of me felt repelled by her actions. That she risked her marriage for a man who so casually dismissed her son ignited a fresh wave of anger. The mere fact that she had any feelings for him made it difficult to move past it. Fighting the urge to lash out, I struggled to keep my emotions in check. We sat quietly on her bed for a few moments, a heavy silence between us. Then she reached for my hand. Dan, I understand you're angry with me. I know I've let you down and probably messed up your thinking by not following my own advice. I'm really sorry. What I did was selfish and hurtful, and I wish I could undo it. I acknowledged her words with a nod, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her, so I stared at the bed instead. She gently lifted my chin, forcing me to meet her eyes, which were now filled with a stern expression. Listen, I know I'm the last person who should be giving advice, but before you end up making the same mistakes your parents did, there's something I need to say. What mistakes? I asked, not hiding my skepticism. With your wife. I let out a bitter laugh. You mean the one who lied to me to cover for you? Yes, she lied, and that was wrong, but I put her in that position. She found out about Robert and me by accident. She came over one day just as Robert was leaving. You slept with him in Dad's bed. I shouted, unable to believe what I was hearing. She shook her head vigorously. No, son. He knew Justin was out of town and tried to show up unexpectedly. I didn't let things go that far. He tried, but I didn't want to do anything in the house. When I realized he was going to keep pushing, I put my foot down and told him to leave. When he left, we kissed. That's when Aria saw us. I begged her not to tell you. I made her promise. She agreed, but she wasn't happy about it. She urged me to think about what I was doing and to end it. You still let him into Dad's house. You may not have slept with him, but it was still disrespectful. I know, she said apologetically. If I could change things, I would. I wrestled with my disappointment and asked, so how did Aria go from not being happy about it to covering for you? I broke it off with Robert after Aria caught us. It was a wake-up call, and I stayed clear of him for a while. During that time, Aria and I grew closer. She really became like a daughter to me. I suppose a large part of me was grateful to her, which made me love her even more. But by that weekend, when you and your father went out of town, Robert and I had started seeing each other again. I was supposed to spend the weekend with Aria. We were going to get mayonnaise, pitas, and have a whole girls' weekend. Then Robert called and said he had tickets to the new ballet in town. I tried to cancel things with Aria, but she was disappointed and kept asking why. She said she was looking forward to our girls' day out. Since she kept pressing, I had to be honest with her and tell her the truth. I never asked her to lie to you, but I think she did it because she knew she was supposed to be with me. She didn't want you to ask her why the plans got canceled. That still doesn't let her off the hook, I replied. For some strange reason, I also found myself wondering what kind of man takes a woman to the ballet on Super Bowl Sunday. The kind of man who wants to get laid, that's who. I know, Dan, but don't you think she's suffered enough? Don't you think she's sorry? How long does she have to live in purgatory? I jumped up from the bed. This isn't about making her suffer. I don't trust her. She lied to me to protect you. Your little adulterous liaisons were worth more to her than I was. Her promise to you trumped her vows to me. Why would I trust her? She nodded thoughtfully. So, what are you going to do? Why haven't you divorced her yet? If you can't trust her, you should get rid of her and move on with your life. That stopped me in my tracks. No matter what, I never seriously thought about leaving Aria. What my mother said next sent an arrow straight into my heart. I'm warning you that if you continue mistreating her, she will walk away. At present, she regrets her actions and earnestly seeks to repair your connection. However, the more you distance her, the less painful it becomes. As the pain decreases, it's easier for her to imagine a life without you. You don't want to witness the moment she no longer sheds tears for you. That's the instant she understands she's better off alone than unhappy with you. Take my advice, son. On that day, she'll leave for good, and there won't be a second chance. As I drove home, my mom's words echoed in my mind. I was angry with Aria and didn't trust her, even though deep down I knew she hadn't cheated on me. But she had covered for a cheater, and that was a betrayal I struggled to understand. Despite my anger, I knew I didn't want to end my marriage. Underneath it all, I still loved her. I felt lost, Trusting her seemed impossible now. Knowing she could keep secrets that hurt me made it hard to believe she wouldn't do it again. Once you see someone is capable of something, it's difficult to expect anything less from them in similar situations. When I arrived home, I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. I wasn't ready to face Aria. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. That's what love and trust really are, a leap of faith. You have to believe there's something to break your fall. Otherwise, you just watch helplessly as you plunge into pain and despair. I wanted to take the leap, I really did. But I couldn't be sure there was anything to catch me anymore. My dad's voice surfaced from a distant memory, one of his many lessons. Son, when faced with a seemingly impossible task, you can either run away or figure out how to do it. The answer doesn't always come right away. Sometimes the only thing you can do is take the first step and fight like hell until an answer presents itself. If you don't fight, you'll never be in a position to win. I had to decide if my marriage was worth fighting for, and it was. I loved Aria. Unlike my parents' marriage, ours was built on genuine love and choice, without conditions or hidden agendas. Taking a deep breath, I put one foot in front of the other and stepped off the ledge. When I walked into the house, I found her sitting on the couch, reading a book. She looked up as I entered, then returned to her book. Instead of retreating to another room as I had before, I sat next to her. She looked up again, surprised. Aria, we need to talk. Her body tensed and her eyes welled with tears. Confused but determined, I continued. I want us to go to counseling. We've been in this Cold War for too long, and we need to do something before we end up like my parents. She exhaled shakily and took a deep breath. You mean you're not? Oh my God, Daniel. I thought. She collapsed into my arms, wrapping herself around me, shaking as she cried into my shoulder. Suddenly, her strange reaction made sense. You thought I was leaving you? No, Aria. No. She began to cry even harder. Please, Dan. I'm so sorry. I should never have lied to you. I gently stroked her back. I know, but we have more to work through than just the lies. I have to trust you for this to work, and right now, I don't. I want to, I really do, but I can't. It's not just about the lying, it's about why you did it. She pulled away to look at me. I don't understand. You lied to help my mother cheat. That tells me two things. First, you don't have a problem with cheating as long as it's the woman doing it. You've told me many times that if I ever cheated on you, you'd cut my balls off. Yet you had no issue with my mother cheating on my father. Second, it shows you don't respect me or my feelings. You cared more about covering for my mother than considering how it would affect me. Those are two big hurdles to overcome. She nodded sadly. I get it. I wasn't consciously thinking that way, but I can see how you'd see it like that. I would never, ever cheat on you, though. No matter what you think, I need you to know that. I considered her words. I hated what she did, but I admitted to myself that she was in a tough spot. Yes, she should have told me, but I understood it wasn't easy, and I didn't really believe she had cheated. I realized that someone who didn't know how to handle a difficult situation and was afraid of causing a family breakdown might do what she did. Well, we'll talk about it in counseling. Like I said, we have a lot to get over, but I'm willing to work on it if you are. She hugged me tightly. I'm so willing to work on it, baby. I love you so much, Daniel. You're the best man I know. Epilogue, 1 year later. I tried to hold it in. I really did. But I couldn't. Anger overwhelmed me. There he was, not even 20 feet away, laughing, smiling, taunting me with every breath he took. Why did he get to walk away unscathed after causing so much pain? Why should he get a free pass from karma's sting? I knew my dad would want me to walk away, to just let it go. I could practically hear his voice in my head like a mantra. But I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't. So I walked up to him. I thought I did it pretty calmly, though some witnesses later said I looked like I was itching for a fight. Others said they didn't see that. I only meant to scare him a little, make him feel the need to look over his shoulder at night. What I didn't expect was for him to say the one thing that would make me lose it and go full Hulk. Hey, I know you. You're my son, aren't you? I don't remember hitting him the first time. I don't even remember the second time. All I remember is being pulled off him by 3 guys while he groaned on the floor. I hoped the judge would be lenient. I'd never been in trouble with the law before. I was a hard worker, a married man with a baby on the way. Yes, Aria was pregnant. I thought I would get a slap on the wrist. After all, I was only guilty of taking out the trash. I got lucky. First, it seems my mom and dad finally did something together. They paid a visit to Robert in the hospital. My dad asked my mom to get him some coffee, and while she was gone, he had a talk with Robert. Dad suggested that he drop the charges against me, telling him he turned the other cheek when Robert slept with his wife, but he couldn't do that when his son was on the line. Then my dad leaned in close and whispered something that made Robert's eyes grow wide with fear. When my mom returned with the coffee, my dad patted Robert on the chest like they were old buddies, but his eyes were stone cold, practically evil. As luck would have it, Robert decided not to press charges against me. He said he couldn't do that to his own son. His benevolence knew no bounds. The district attorney decided to press charges anyway, even without Robert's cooperation. It didn't go well. With varying stories from different witnesses, it was hard to prove it wasn't just a fight between 2 men. In the end, the case wasn't strong enough to pursue. The DA had real criminals to deal with. It wasn't worth his time to get involved in a squabble between a father and his son. Sometimes karma works both ways. My parents never got back together, but they left most of the pain in the past. My dad stopped hating my mom after a while, and my mom forgave herself. They could even be in the same room by the time their granddaughter arrived. Neither were married. I think they were both burned out on relationships. They had each married the other to make up for past mistakes and didn't feel the need to go down that road again. Aria and I went to counseling. We found a wonderful therapist named Bethany Carter, who helped us immensely. It took time for me to overcome my mistrust in Aria and to fight the urge to misdirect my anger and disappointment at her. No matter how hard it got, we never stopped fighting for our marriage. There were good days and bad days, but eventually the bad days became fewer. We realized that everything we went through resulted in better communication between us. When you jump off a figurative cliff, everything changes. Some things get destroyed, others just get damaged, but the things that are truly unbreakable survive the fall. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.